Moving on to the last session. We have such a wonderful session throughout the day for the Cybersec Asia 2024 across Thailand International Cyber Week 2024 powered by NCSA. The last session will be the talk under the topics of Barbarians at the Gateway, Game of Pawns, the emerging threats of AI in cybersecurity. By this session, it's now time to welcome Global Advisory CISCO. Please welcome Dave Levis on stage.
Thank you very much. We made it. How's everybody doing so far now that they have got through their second day of the conference? Good? Bad? Ugly? There we go. We got some thumbs up. Well, I am here to take you home. This is not literally, this is the end of the line for us, but this has been an absolutely fantastic opportunity, and I really am very thankful to the organization that puts this on to have me here to give a talk. So I am going to talk about CISCO products for about 1 second. I'm just going to say cisco.com/security. There you go. That's it. That's as far as I'm going to go. So Game of Thrones was a show that I enjoyed quite a lot, and I did a talk a long time ago called Barbarians at the Gateway, and it was about different types of attackers. And honestly, the game has changed. So this time, Game of Pwns, play on Game of Thrones. So it really gives you that sort of flavor. But anyway, I've been doing security in one form or another now for about 30 years. And along that way, I have lost a lot of sleep, gone gray. There's more of me than there used to be. And it's been a very interesting journey, to say the very least. This is usually me sitting in an airport somewhere wondering how I'm going to get to that next destination, and that'll be me later on today. I even got ChatGPT to put up an image of me. I said, do a picture of me as a Canadian so everybody know how Canadian I really am. And apparently, in Canada, we have very strange drone-like birds, but that's another thing for another time. I'll figure that out someday. Now, as a hacker in Canada, we do things a little bit differently, and it can be really entertaining and also could have rather disastrous results. I tend to be this guy. After 30 years, 20 of which I spent as a defender, I had a great deal of frustration because of all the security issues that kept coming up over and over again. 30 years into my career, we're still having a lot of the same discussions, and it's time for us to move beyond that. For example, what do we see when we see this? A possible threat. Now, statistically, on average, annually, they are responsible for 5 deaths, 5 people being killed. Then we have an actual threat in cattle. Cows, by contrast, are responsible for about 22 deaths per year. Yes, a very different sample size, I get that, I usually get called out on that, but this is just an example of how we're going to focus on what the real threats are. And we're not just going to sprinkle magical pixie dust on things and say AI is going to save us all. There we go. So my boss, Wendy Nather, absolutely fantastic human being, but she likes to torment me at work. So one day she was coming back from a conference in Amsterdam, and she sent me this picture from her plane window. And she said, tell me where I am. And I'm like, boss, I got stuff to do. She goes, no, tell me where I am. Fine. I took that picture and I triangulated based on time of day, when she sent it. I knew she was airborne. And I said, is this your plane? And she said, yes. Now, tell me where I'm sitting on the plane. It's like, I have things to do. She goes, that's okay, I'll give you a pass. So I'm like, all right, fine. So I went through there based on the triangulation. In the first picture, you couldn't quite see the tip because it got cut off there, but you could see the tip of the wing. So I knew she was sitting in business class. Not a big stretch there. I knew from open source intelligence, being Twitter, that when it was called Twitter, that she was a big fan of Delta Airlines. So I knew she was probably on that Delta Airlines flight. So I figured, okay, you're sitting in seat 5A. Well, turned out she was sitting in 6A. I was that close. I was so close. All of this took less than 5 minutes, and that was with me complaining as well. This is just an example of what an attacker can do with open source intelligence. I didn't use anything that I could have got from checking your calendar or anything like that, just publicly available information. This is how easy it is for an attacker to cause trouble in your organization. Now, when we add in layers of things like AI, and we realize that they have tools at their disposal to do things in a much quicker fashion. We used to have to worry about Dave. Dave was the one that was the real problem in the environment, not me. But yeah, sometimes mean. And we have to understand that human error is a real big piece of it, but now when we have human error that has been weaponized using algorithms, things can get really interesting. This usually is me, the old man yelling at the cloud, but that's another story for another day. So quite a few years ago, there was this thing that came out called the hacker list. And the idea here was if you need somebody to do security penetration testing in your organization or something like that, that you could hire somebody from this list. The irony is this list went live and within 24 hours had been hacked. And all their information was waylaid. I'm not beating up on them. Apparently they still exist. But this is just an example of, even through the best laid plans, security does come up short quite often. And then we have public bug bounty programs that have varying degrees of success, but organizations use this as an input to help augment their security practice. So it's all a bit of a theme of, how are we going to improve things in our organizations? There we go. Now, the attackers that we have to contend with run the gamut. We've got the bored kids. I've got one of these at home. We've got the bored teenagers. I've got one of these at home. The problem is with kids of this age, they tend to make really poor decisions. And we have to figure out how we're going to better train them so that they have the right information to make the right decisions to be better secured in their own lives. Because unfortunately, they'll be preyed upon by folks like these, the hacktivists. They may have a noble intention, they may not. You never really know because you never really know who they are that you're dealing with. And then we have to worry about the nation-state actors. They will gladly use hacktivists to their disposal, to use individuals to try and conscript them. And these are the kind of things that we have to constantly worry about as to, who is it that's trying to get into our environment. Most times it's just the standard garden variety villain. The one sending you the email saying, oh, if you send me all of this bot to this address, you'll get, free good karma for life. Yeah, it doesn't work out that way. Now, the thing is, with the attackers, they used to use tools like this, where there were various ones from like the high orbit ion cannon that was used for doing denial of service, or SQL injection tools, all these sort of things. The crazy thing is, a lot of these still work, but they did nothing to protect the kids and the teenagers that were using them. Then we had things that we had popping up, like the Mirai botnet. This popped up a few years back. The crazy thing about this was it was using default credentials. Default credentials harvest from, I think, 62 or 63 different devices that were easily accessible on the internet. And that was used to build out a denial of service botnet that was, at the time, being able to do traffic up to about a terabyte worth of data. And we look at this as, the security platform that they were trying to have as the one ring to rule them all and take things over, but that's another story as well. So, where do we begin when we're talking about these sort of things? We have to look at the pieces that are coming together. AI is not a magical thing. That's not a get-out-of-jail-free card. Excuse me. We have to understand what it means because in conjunction with operational technology, in conjunction with things like 5G, all of these elements are going to come together, and we have to do a rational assessment of how this is going to impact our environment and environments of others that we touch. 5G is a wonderful networking platform that we have seen interconnections around the world, fast, reliable. Unfortunately, you have a very large density from towers because it's a much shorter distance than 4G was. And these are potential targets for an attacker. The more towers, the more targets of opportunity. The faster speeds, the more chance that nodes that are running using 5G can be used to be employed into botnets, be employed into denial of service attacks and things like that. Then we have the operational technology. I spent 9 years in power systems, and let me tell you, this is an absolute dog's breakfast. Not everything in here is current. Some of this software has been running in place for 30 years. And if these systems go down, there's no case of just patch it and everything will be fine. It's much more in depth than that. And we look at all the different pieces that come together in order to make sure that power is happening. That's just more targets opportunity for the attacker. And we have to look at the standard things like discover, segment, detect, and respond. We have to make sure that we're looking at these sort of things. And for example, quite a few years ago, my friends and I found a power distributor in this region that was putting their status messages of their SCADA system on Twitter. So we could sit there and read all the status messages. We contacted them and we said, this is abjectly a bad idea, and here's why. It took them a while, but they finally went, oh, wait, okay, I get it now. But that was just it. We didn't vilify them. We didn't make them feel bad about it. We explained to them why this was a problem, and they did take it down. And this is why we have to constantly have events like this where we're sharing information, getting that chance to learn from each other. Because with artificial intelligence, OT, 5G, all these things coming together, there's also cybersecurity challenges that will grow out of this, because the attackers look at this as an opportunity for them as well. Now, AI is that wonderful double-edged sword. We usually go, oh, this is what we think about when we think about AI. Or at least I do, because I'm a big sci-fi fan. But a lot of times it's like, how can we use AI to build into our products, whatever those products happen to be? The problem here is, yes, you can have improved reliability, improved efficiency, all of these things. But as you can see here, we have things like algorithmic bias, privacy breaches, autonomous decision-making that might not go the way you think it's going to go. And we have to look at that through the eyes of the attacker. The attacker will look at things like perturbations in malware. I always stumble on that word. And that is a controlled change in the data set, which could, by definition, be an attacker injecting malicious code into your data. That is a possibility. Unvetted data sets that people can use, it's like, how was your model trained for your AI? Where'd you get the data? Ask OpenAI about that. Dang it. Poison data. Data that's deliberately put in to actually break things. How many people here remember Microsoft's chatbot called Tay from quite a few years ago? Anybody? All right, well, they created a chatbot. The whole idea there was to appeal to millennials, so it was a while ago. The problem here was they attached it to social media. In less than 24 hours, social media had turned that chatbot into an abject racist. And that was because the data had been poisoned. We have to look at things like model zoos. When you're building your AI, are you using a model that has already been pre-built and incorporated into your own platform? How can you be sure that that has been vetted properly? And model inversion. How did you build your model? Is it something that is proprietary? Does an attacker have the ability to reverse engineer it ostensibly and see where the secret sauce is? And of course, the physical domain attacks, which, surprise, surprise, never go away. We've always talked about having firewalls, IDS, and multi-factor authentication, you name it, all these pieces. None of that has actually gone away, and I believe I'm under attack. Okay. 5G is a new frontier in that it is really making things far more easy to communicate, because I look at some of the old networking I had to do when I used to build out M-bone networks for the US military. Those were troublesome at the best of times, and the speeds and feeds were really bad. Nowadays, you got a whole lot more going on. But there's risks that come with 5G. All right. Supply chain, misconfigurations, potential denial of service attacks. All of these things that we've always talked about in other environments, in other situations where the risks haven't gone away. I know, it's unnerving, isn't it? And when we then look in the cybersecurity of an open world, we have to deal with the hackers. Personally, I call them attackers because those are ones of criminal intent, because I myself am a very old hacker. And I kind of feel bad when the media calls us horrible things, but that's another story. We have to figure out how we can make that trustful, how we can learn to better work with others, internal to our own organizations, external. We have bodies like government certs, we have bodies that are trying to build things out. We have multiple vendors out there that are trying to provide you tools. But the thing is, and I work for a vendor, full disclosure, we have to make sure that when you go to talk to any vendor, that you have your requirements properly spelled out, that you know what it is that you're trying to do in your environment. What are you trying to achieve? What are the outcomes you're trying to achieve to satisfy the aspirations of your business? Because vendors will sell you whatever you want to buy, but you got to make sure that you're educating yourself and know what it is that you're looking for your environment. When we're talking about things like AI, people are like rushing into it because, let's be honest, ChatGPT has been a catalytic event. It's got people to talk about it, even though it's an LLM. But it's got people talking. And it's really interesting when you can create images and spreadsheets and all these sort of things. It's really kind of neat in that regard, but at this point, it's more of just a functional toy. But we need guardrails. We need to figure out how we can protect ourselves and how we're going to do that. And when we do that, we have to look at things like various types of legislation. In Canada, the EU and USA all came out with legislation pertaining to AI, just in the last 12 months. Dubai even has a minister responsible for artificial intelligence. So there is that movement afoot. And Thailand is really in a unique position in that you can literally be out in the forefront in a very, very short space of time. And when we're talking about things, these sort of things with AI and the risks involved, yeah, it worked. Okay. These are all examples of industries that are using AI, where it has been built into their networks. And if things have gone wrong, like the last point, they can go really wrong. This is a case here where a legal interpretation was put through ChatGPT in order to make a case that was presented before a judge. Problem was, and this is not the only case, I've found 3 like this, the lawyer cited legal precedent that didn't exist. ChatGPT just was being helpful and made up legal precedent that never happened. There was no case, it was all fallacy. And this is one of those things. We have to be sure of what we're dealing with because we can't just take AI at face value. We have to make sure that we're kicking the tires to ensure what we're getting. Because AI is everywhere. Even when you order food at home, there's AI built into the system to make sure it gets to your place. AI really is a fundamental umbrella that encompasses multiple different pieces. Sorry, I'm stumbling over my tongue. The jet lag from flying from Canada is catching up with me. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning, and generative AI. These are the 4 key elements here. And the thing is, for AI to work, you have to look at it thinking rationally, thinking humanly, and acting rationally. And systems aren't at that point yet. And I say yet. It is entirely possible we'll get there in a very short space of time. And for an AI to be successful, it has to be able to process natural language, have knowledge representation, automated reasoning, and machine learning. All of these elements have to work together, and we have to make sure that we're dealing with this in a cohesive fashion. Because those can then have impacts on the security of your environment, the security of your networks, the security of everything across the board. If things go wrong, they do have the potential to go really, really wrong. And we want to make sure that we're not getting into that. And I thought I took this out, my bad. Moving along. Generative AI is really fantastic in the things that it can do, but the attackers are using it as well. I've seen cases where a voice was created by an attacker to sound like the CEO of a company, and they use that to call the company and demand money for a transaction because they were stuck in some airport. The crazy thing is that as this was happening, the CEO, who the attackers knew was on vacation, came back into the building. And my friend who was working there, they dragged the CEO in and they had him listen to this conversation that was happening with an AI. And he was surprised because it sounded like him. And it had the nuanced inflections in the voice and all the rest of it. So it was really quite scary in that regard. But they weren't being very careful in making sure that the CEO was actually gone on vacation. So AIs to work, they need a lot of human input. They need a lot of computing power and a lot of training data. And this is where things fall down. You have to make sure you have good training data because you have to have your requirements fully spelled out. I mentioned that earlier. You've got to have them really clear because bad things will happen. My friend Mikko Hipponen, he wrote about applications, writing applications, and guess what? This is a thing. But the problem is if those applications are all bad and they're writing more bad applications, that could be a real problem. Here's an example. Somebody built a ChatGPT plugin called WormGPT. There's also another one called FraudGPT that you can use to attack and build malware. These are things that were never intended, and yet here we are. I'll give you a chance to get that pic there. There we go. All right. So when we're building out our AI systems, we have to look at transparency, disclosing the content that was generated by AI. Are you creating something and submitting it to a conference that was written by ChatGPT as an example? You have to be clear about that. Designing a model that is not going to be generated with illegal content. And we've seen many cases that crop up, especially in the United States and the EU. And these are real and present dangers that can cause big problems, not only for the original content creator, but for the organization that uses the data set. And we have to be able to publish summaries of copyright data that we were using, because otherwise the lawyers will come. So some best practices that we have to look at. Constantly training our employees. We've heard a lot of discussion over the course of the last 2 days about training. This is essential, and this is why Thailand is in a great position, because in a lot of cases, greenfield, you have a great opportunity to build out from this. having strong access control measures to the data that you're using for your AI systems. This is essential, because if an attacker can get in and poison your day is going to get really, really bad. You have to have good user activity monitoring and also data loss protection. All of this stuff is things we've been talking about for years. They're not going to go away in this modern age. Want to be able to look at and analyze, that's a good word, analyze how users and applications and systems are operating and behaving. Because if something's going wrong, you want to know. You want to be able to collect all of the data you can in order to pump into your SIM solution or your XDR solution, whatever works best for you, to analyze and look for where the attack patterns are coming from. Because bad things will happen. One organization I was at, we started doing log analysis and found out there was a data transfer that was happening every Friday at 8 a.m., tar up the database, shipped out. Nobody said anything. I was on the job for a week and I said, where's this going? That's our offsite backup. Okay, cool. Look up the IP address. It was in a country that we didn't do business with. We didn't have an office. And I said, why is this happening? And they went, oh, it had been happening for 8 years. So something that everybody just assumed was supposed to happen turned out was not, and it was a real problem. You want to make sure you have data loss prevention techniques in place because bad things can and will happen. You want to look at multi-factor authentication, biometrics, any way to control who it is that's accessing your data. Passwords have never been a security control. Let me say that again. Passwords have never been a security control. They are a control, but they are not a security control. They are a knee-jerk reaction by a professor in 1962 at MIT. And here we are today still thinking that it's a security control. You want to have good user interfaces. You don't want to have applications written by engineers for engineers because somebody in HR or finance won't know what to do with it. You want to have all the building blocks in place to make sure that you're encrypting your data, making sure your systems are patched. All of these things are absolutely essential. What's your response strategy going to be in the event that something happens? How are you going to isolate and how are you going to react if you're dealing with an AI model? The landscape has changed. We have to change how we respond. How are you going to do your investigation if it's a data that's been poisoned? And do you have backups of the original data? Do you know what the original data was supposed to look like? These are the things you have to take into account when you're protecting your environment. Also, how are you going to coordinate with legal and HR? Because that will come up. Communicating with external bodies is essential. You want to make sure that you're tackling the problems now before they grow. And with AI, with high-speed computing, all the rest of it, things are going to get faster and problems are going to happen at a much quicker rate in the future. So now is the time to dig in and make sure that we're doing it properly. We have to build on trust. We have to work together, not only within our own country, within our community at large and the global community, making sure that people are sharing information, learning from each other. Having more events like this will help improve matters by educating people. And I think we can get to that brighter future quite quickly as long as we knuckle down and start working at it now. So thank you very much from this Canadian to all of you. And thank you very much for listening. I really do appreciate your time here today.